Picture this: Manhattan, 1962. A teenage girl with an unconventional nose and a voice that could shatter glass steps into an elevator. 30 seconds later, she steps out as the future of American entertainment. 2 floors, 1 pitch, career made. This is the story of how Barbra Streisand's entire destiny changed in the time it takes to ride an elevator, and the powerful forces that tried to keep her from ever reaching the top floor. Before that fateful elevator ride, Barbra Jones Streisand was nobody special. At least, that's what the world wanted her to believe. Growing up in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, she was the girl with the funny nose, the strange name, and the voice that made neighbors slam their windows shut. Her father died when she was just 15 months old, leaving her mother struggling to make ends meet while raising 2 children alone. Little did anyone know that this awkward teenager, who spelled her name Barbra until she decided to drop the second A to be different, was harboring a talent so extraordinary it would eventually redefine what it meant to be a star in America. While other girls her age were learning to apply makeup and giggle at boys, Barbra was studying the great performers, watching Judy Garland films until the reels wore thin, memorizing every inflection, every gesture, every breath. Her mother, Diana, wanted her to be a teacher, safe, practical, respectable, but Barbra had other plans. At just 16, she would sneak into Manhattan, riding the subway with nothing but pocket change and impossible dreams. She haunted the theaters of Broadway, sleeping on friends' couches, working odd jobs, and waiting for a moment. The entertainment industry in the early 1960s had very specific ideas about what a star should look like, and Barbra Streisand didn't fit any of those molds. The industry wanted blonde bombshells and conventional beauties. They wanted singers who stayed in their lane, who didn't challenge audiences or push boundaries. What they got instead was a Brooklyn teenager with a nose she refused to fix, a voice that defied categorization, and an unshakable belief that she belonged on the biggest stages in America. The establishment wasn't ready for Barbra Streisand, but she was ready for them. By 1960, 18-year-old Barbra was living the classic struggling artist story, but with a twist that would become her signature. She refused to compromise. While other aspiring performers took whatever gigs they could get, Barbra was selective, almost arrogantly so. She believed she was destined for greatness, and she wasn't willing to settle for anything less. She survived on food samples from delicatessens, slept in friends' apartments, and wore the same outfit for days. Yet even in her poorest moments, there was something regal about her presence. Fellow struggling actors would later recall how Barbra carried herself like she was already a star, not out of delusion, but out of an unshakable inner knowing that her time would come. The truth no one dared to say out loud was that the entertainment industry was systematically excluding performers who didn't fit their narrow definition of marketability. Barbra's unconventional looks, her Jewish background, and her refusal to play by established rules made her a triple threat, but not in the way the industry typically meant that phrase. She auditioned for countless roles, facing rejection after rejection. Casting directors would take one look at her and shake their heads before she even opened her mouth. "Too ethnic," they'd whisper. "Not pretty enough. Doesn't photograph well." What they failed to understand was that Barbra Streisand wasn't trying to be like everyone else. She was creating an entirely new category of star. Finally revealed decades later, industry insiders admitted that many of them recognized her extraordinary talent immediately, but they simply didn't know how to market someone so unique. The safe bet was always the conventional choice, the performer who reminded audiences of someone they already loved. Barbra was asking them to love something they'd never seen before. The first real break came in an unexpected place, a Greenwich Village nightclub called the Lion. It wasn't glamorous. It was a basement venue that smelled of cigarettes and stale beer, where aspiring performers competed for the attention of late-night crowds who were often more interested in their drinks than the entertainment. But for Barbra, the lion represented something precious, a stage where she could be herself completely. Night after night, she would perform for small audiences, developing her unique style and building a following of devoted fans who recognized they were witnessing something special. Her performances weren't just concerts, they were masterclasses in emotional storytelling. Little did the world know that during these early performances, Barbra was experimenting with techniques that would later revolutionize popular music. She was learning to use her voice not just as an instrument, but as a tool for dramatic interpretation. Every song became a small play, every lyric a window into a character's soul. The regular patrons at the Lion began to anticipate her sets, knowing that each night would bring something different, something unexpected. Word started to spread through the tight-knit community of New York performers and industry professionals. There was this girl, they said, this strange and wonderful girl who could make you forget everything else existed when she sang. However, success at the Lion didn't translate to broader recognition. The mainstream entertainment industry remained resistant to her charms. Television appearances were rare and often uncomfortable, with hosts and producers clearly unsure how to present her to mass audiences. She was too sophisticated for variety shows, too unconventional for traditional venues, and too uncompromising to fit into existing categories. The frustration was building. Barbra knew she had something extraordinary to offer, but the gatekeepers of the industry seemed determined to keep her locked out. What she needed was someone with real power, someone who could see past the surface and recognize the revolutionary talent beneath. She needed a champion, and she was about to meet one in the most unlikely of places. His name was David Merrick, and in 1962, he was quite possibly the most powerful theatrical producer on Broadway. Known for his perfectionism, his temper, and his uncanny ability to spot talent that others missed, Merrick had built an empire by trusting his instincts over conventional wisdom. When David Merrick decided someone was a star, the industry listened. Merrick had heard whispers about the unusual girl performing in Greenwich Village. Industry colleagues mentioned her in passing, some with admiration, others with bewilderment. But Merrick was intrigued by performers who defied categorization. His biggest successes had often come from taking risks on unconventional talent that other producers wouldn't touch. The truth that emerged years later was that Merrick had been specifically looking for someone like Barbra, a performer with the vocal power to carry a Broadway show, but with enough uniqueness to generate buzz and controversy. In the early 1960s, Broadway was beginning to evolve beyond the traditional musical comedy format, and Merrick was at the forefront of that evolution. He was developing a new musical called I Can Get It For You Wholesale, a show that needed a supporting actress who could deliver both comedy and pathos, someone who could steal scenes without overwhelming the production. The role of Miss Marmalstein wasn't a starring part, but it was a showcase, the kind of role that could launch a career if performed by the right person. Finally revealed in later interviews, Merrick admitted that he had already decided to audition Barbra based on the recommendations he'd received. But he was a cautious man who preferred to observe potential stars in their natural habitat before making formal offers. He wanted to see her perform live, to gauge audience reaction, to determine if the buzz was justified. What happened next would become one of the most legendary encounters in Broadway history, though the truth of that encounter was far more complex and calculated than anyone realized at the time. The meeting wasn't as accidental as the legend suggests. David Merrick's office was located in the Brill Building, the legendary Manhattan structure that housed music publishers, songwriters, and entertainment industry power brokers. This wasn't just any office building. It was the beating heart of American popular music, where careers were made and dreams were shattered on a daily basis. Barbra had been summoned to the building for what she believed was a routine audition for a small role in Merrick's new production. She arrived early, as was her habit, dressed in her best outfit, which, given her financial situation, wasn't saying much. But even in her simple clothes, there was something about her presence that made people take notice. Little did she know that this wasn't going to be a typical audition. Merrick had arranged for several key members of his production team to be in the building that day, not by coincidence, but by design. He wanted multiple opinions, multiple perspectives on this unusual performer who had been generating so much underground buzz. The elevator in the Brill building was notoriously slow, a fact that had frustrated countless visitors over the years. But on this particular day, that mechanical inefficiency was about to become the catalyst for one of entertainment history's most crucial moments. As Barbra waited for the elevator, she was unaware that David Merrick himself was approaching from another direction. Truth no one dared to say at the time was that Merrick had timed his arrival carefully. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was,